Thank you very, very much, Chairman Jiro Hanyu, Chairman of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and colleagues and friends from the wide spectrum of Tokyo and Japan society. I'm sorry I don't look as good as Ms. Doden standing in front of you, but it is a privilege to be able to share with you some of the views that you too are probably concerned and are probably interested in. As Chairman Hanyu said, Thailand was where ASEAN was born back in 1967. And it was Thailand which played a very important role in evolving the region into a community called ASEAN. And Thailand has been experimenting with democracy long before anybody else in the region because it has never been colonized. In 1932, the Reformation took place from constitutional monarchy, from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy. But ever since, history of democracy in Thailand is a yo-yo. It's never been stable and never been secure. We have had many military interventions. We have had a few constitutions. There was a student from University of London who went to the British Museum and asked to borrow a copy of the Thai Constitution. And the librarian said, "Sorry, we don't keep periodicals here." So the military intervention into Thai politics has been a norm rather than an exception. There have always been conflicts, there have always been tension and confrontation in the Thai polity. But what made this one different from the rest is the fact that in the past 15, 20 years, Thailand has transformed itself to become more industrialized thanks to the relocation of factories, small and medium-sized enterprises from Japan, investment from Japan, technology transfer from Japan. So much so that Thailand has become second largest economy in ASEAN, next to Indonesia only. Indonesia is 1 trillion economy. Thailand is 380 billion US dollars economy, number 2, but most diversified, more diversified than Indonesia. There's every industry, every profession, every kind of services in the Thai economy. Part of that diversity is domestic and internal. That is, the last 15 and 20 years, growth had also occurred in the periphery, in the provinces, in the countryside. But the Thai political structure had always been centralized. Centralized through the bureaucracy, centralized through political institutions, other bureaucratic institutions, the police, the military, or even the educational institution. So very centralized state. When growth occurs in the periphery, when there are new class of people, of business people, nouveau riche, happening on the landscape outside of Bangkok, they would want the space, they would want access, they would want participation, they would want transparency, they would want the rule of law. The year 2001 was the year that was very decisive. That was when Mr. Thaksin first came onto the scene in Thai politics. And he came in riding on the wave of the expectation of the people in the countryside that now we have our opportunities. Now our vote means something. Now we have the political power to shape policies in Bangkok. So there was a political awareness with Mr. Thaksin coming in. And there was a lot of overwhelming power coming in. And there are a lot of populist policies being created to respond to the expectation and rising expectation of the people in the provinces, in the regions, and in the periphery. Unfortunately, that power was not used well. Unfortunately, that power was abused in some cases. Unfortunately, that power was used to accumulate wealth here and there. So, the first awareness of the power of the people has become the instrument of more concentration of powers, less in the bureaucracy, but in the business sector. The shortest road to national power for provincial business people was to join a political party, go to Bangkok, become ministers. And the agenda is, of course, more power and more wealth to us. So the structure of the country, centralized, was given to Thailand by Rama V the same time as the Meiji Reform, in response to the pressure from the colonial powers, the British and the French. So the country had to be centralized, governors have to be appointed from Bangkok, every leaders of every bureaucracy will have to be appointed from Bangkok. It became very centralized. Politics that came after growth and industrialization and the nouveau riche around the country came in and had to work with that bureaucracy. So power is concentrated. Economic interests are now being accumulated. More populist policies are being formulated. More money is being spent. Along with the larger budget, there's a lot of corruption, a lot of leakages, a lot of waste, to the point where the urban educated people, Bangkok-based people, felt that the country is going in the wrong direction. Therefore, the demonstrations since October last year into May, when the military coup took place. So you see the journey and the political evolution of the country, from concentrated bureaucracy to become a rather wide open politics, back to using the bureaucracy to concentrate power, to gain more influence, to gain more interest economically. Abuse. The polarization of the polity of the country took place in the past several years. It became red and yellow, became extremely divisive, became dangerously confrontational. The May 22nd coup d'etat somehow saved or gave the country a breathing space. The two trains were colliding for sure, and the country was going to fall over the cliff. And the military were asking, can you settle the differences among yourselves, politicians? They said no. There was a very simple sentence, then we take over the power. I was here in Japan on some mission. So what happened on the 22nd of May was restraining the country from falling over the cliff. Right after the coup, a sense of euphoria, relief, because it's 7 months of troubles, 7 months of traffic jams, 7 months of dangerous confrontation. So it was a relief. So 82%, 85% approval rating that the military did the right thing. On top of that relief, also the promise that the coup leaders will institute reform, restructuring, and one of the main themes of the demonstration for the 7 months previously was decentralization, decentralization, decentralization. Let's give the power to the regions, let's give the power to the people, let's give the power to the provinces. So the ticket to come in on the part of the coup leaders was the ticket of reform, ticket of decentralization, ticket of giving the country a breathing space. Now the government has been established, the Legislative Assembly has been appointed, the National Reform Council has been appointed, 250. The countries are now on the administrative mode, moving toward a new constitution, another one, and moving toward eventual general elections sometime in 2 years, year and a half, 2 years. The challenge is this. The challenge is coming in on the ticket of reform and decentralization. You don't hear much about decentralization anymore. And you remember what led the country into trouble, into divisiveness, was because of the concentration of power inside, in the capital. Now you don't hear much anymore. And probably it is not in the mindset and the mentality of the people in uniforms to think about decentralization. This is rather obvious. But without that reform, without decentralization of the police department, which has been an instrument of abuse, of power, it is going to be difficult to see the country back on track, a more substantive democracy. You may have forms, you may have institutions, you may have framework, you may have constitution, you have political parties, you have parliaments, but you really don't have substantive democracy. So the challenge for Thailand is how to bring substance to the form and the institutions of democracy that we have adopted back in 1932. And this is the challenge for all of us who are proponents of democracy, small d democracy, everywhere. Community of democracies in the West, foundations including the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Nippon Foundation, interested in promoting the values of democracy. Where and when are we going to be satisfied? When the countries adopted a constitution? When the countries have political parties? When the countries have their parliaments? Or when the countries really practice the rule of law, real meaningful participation, accountability, and when people have equal space in the system. That's the challenge for those pro-democracy people everywhere in the world. And I've been asking this question in the West, that rather than promoting democracy, think about democracy derailed. They need advice, they need help, they need time, they need sympathy. Because Thailand is the second largest economy in ASEAN, it is important. Because it is in the heart of the ASEAN landscape, it is important. Because it is in the center of mainland Southeast Asia, it is important. You can think about connectivity east, west, north, south, from Vietnam to Myanmar into India, from South China through Laos, Myanmar, you have to go through Thailand in order to go through Malaysia down to Singapore, across to Indonesia. It's the crossroads. And it is the largest concentration of Japanese investment in Southeast Asia. So yes, the environment is still very friendly and very welcoming. But you wish that Thailand will get back on the road of democracy as soon as possible. What to expect? Well, it's not going to be a perfect constitution coming out. The best is to expect for a rather broad and general principles and some issues and mechanisms to make sure that there won't be any polarization as we have experienced in the past 15 years or 13 years since 2001. And that the younger generation who are more aware now, and we expect that every time that there's a coup, the new generation would be more aware and understand the substance of democracy. When I say substance of democracy, I mean electoral victory is not a license to do anything and everything. That is, you can't use the argument that because I am elected, therefore I can do anything and everything. I can change everything. The constitutions, the laws, anything. And that's what happened in the past 13 years. So the first substance of democracy will have to be that in a democracy, power is limited. Otherwise, it is not a democracy, it is majoritarianism. You have the majority through the elections, you have absolute power to do everything and anything that you want. Somehow, the aware public, knowing that a lot of conflict of interest going on, knowing that a lot of abuse is going on, knowing that a lot of changes are for personal gains or family gains or party gains. The politically aware people are not going to allow that to happen. So the first substance is power is limited in a democracy. The second issue will have to be that the bureaucracy has to be broadened, that there is no nepotism in the system, no relatives being appointed, no close associates being promoted in the military, in the diplomacy, in the governance of the country, Ministry of Interior, appointing governors, appointing heads of police for provincial offices. All these things will have to be restrained. And that will have to be one of the issues that the new constitution will have to address. The other one probably would be how to make sure that there won't be this abuse and polarization happening again in the future. And one way, possibly, is to go back to previous practices in Thailand before it became fully democratic and abused. And that is, we used to have a constitution that did not specify that the Prime Minister will have to come from a member of Parliament. Sounds rather backtracking. Sounds rather a radical return to a limited democracy. But the experiences in the past few years have not been comforting to the people, or to a lot of people, that it's not going to be abused. Once we have the electoral power, we will do everything in our power to do anything, to change anything, to accomplish anything, including changing the law to benefit our group, our party, our families. That is another issue that will have to be deliberated on. I think there will be some form of mechanism for the military to continue to exert power, either through appointed Senate or through some form of mechanism of control that would require prior consideration before any particular initiatives to be able to implement as government policies, in order to avoid the abuse. This is going to be an ongoing process until such time that people feel they are ready. Let us open up, let us make it truly democratic, and let us move on a democratic path, like we have done in the past, but it was abused. We have had a people's constitution that requires the Prime Minister to come from the head of political parties or the largest majority in the parliament. And that's what happened. That is, take the power, this is a majority, we can do anything. There could be that safety valve that maybe the Prime Minister doesn't have to come from the parliament or from political parties. until the time when they feel more comfortable and more confident. Now, this is backtracking, for sure. But you have to also understand the fact that Thailand is finding its new balance politically. It has been off balance. It has been dangerously off balance to the point of imminent civil war. Now, there's a thinking that maybe we have to restrain it a little bit rather than open it up fully. It will be controversial. There will be complaints and protests, and there will be reactions from the international community. But then those people who have taken the step are saying, give us some time so that we can tune this new balance, and we will get back to a full democratic path in the future when the polity is ready. My hope is that the shortest period of time of this, what I call administrative mode, with the government, with the National Assembly, with the appointed Reform Council, shortest period of time. Let's get back on the mode of democracy, limited it may be, but let the people be part of the process. Designing the new structure for Thailand, it won't be a perfect constitution. It doesn't have to be, it cannot be, because it is being written in this atmosphere of military control. But let the people coming into the process take part, participate, make a contribution, move on, making it broader into the future. The country benefits from this seizure of power because it stops the country from falling off over the cliff. But from now onward, I don't expect it to be a perfect constitution, as I said, and I hope it will be short. I hope the people will be allowed to come in and take over and move on. And I think they have learned a lot in the past several months. I think they have learned a lot. They have learned that concentration of power is not good for the country. They have learned that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts, absolutely. They have learned that concentration of power suffocates people around the country. So the shortest period possible is best. And let's move on into the future, because there are so many things waiting for Thailand to take up as the centerpiece geographically of ASEAN, as the second largest economy of ASEAN, as the initiator of this ASEAN enterprise, ASEAN vision, that we are now hoping it will be an integrated, one market, dynamic, at the end of next year. The success of the ASEAN enterprise is very much in the interest of Japan, very much in the interest of East Asia, because we are the centerpiece of the region that is bubbling, that is growing. We have become more important to the world than 20 years ago. Anything happen to us economically will have a deeper impact on the world more than 10 years ago, more than 15 years ago. So it is in the interest of everyone to get ASEAN going. And the second largest and the most diversified economy of ASEAN, $380 billion GDP, will have to find its own new balance. your support, your understanding, your sympathy is very much necessary. And Thailand will remain friendly to investment, to business from Japan. No issue of personal insecurity. It will remain open. It will remain open for business. But it is taking a break on that democratic experiment so that it can find its new balanced structure. And in the end, it will be up to the people, not any particular group of people, to help fine-tune that system into the future, to make a full contribution to the evolution of ASEAN. Lately, Thailand has been a weight on the ASEAN evolution because Thailand could not make decisions, because the parliament was not in the mood to consider anything ASEAN. You see the irony, a founding member of ASEAN, the founding document of ASEAN was called the Bangkok Declaration. But in the last 13, 14 years, Thailand had not been performing as much as it should have been performing. I was at ASEAN for 5 years. I had to work with 5 prime ministers from Thailand. The only country that beat Thailand was Japan. I began with Mr. Abe as prime minister. I came back. I left ASEAN when Mr. Abe came back to power. In between, I think there were about 6 or 7. But then you are back on your path. Even. You're moving forward. Let's all hope. Thailand is going through its own problem, trying to find that path, trying to get back on that path. It has to. Otherwise, it will have a negative impact on the ASEAN evolution, on the ASEAN community building, on the ASEAN community efforts of building a community. And that will have implications on Japanese industry, Japanese business, foreign investments, trade, tourism, everything. So it is that centerpiece that is now looking for a new beginning. And that new beginning, nobody can dictate, nobody can impose, nobody can do it for them. It will have to be the 65 million Thai people through this slow process of coming in and learning the way of true and substantive democracy, which will take some time. It cannot be wished into being, but it is the objective that the Thai people have for themselves, that we have to find our way out of this very difficult situation. We hope for your support, we hope for your sympathy, we hope for your understanding, and definitely we hope for your patience so that we can be back and be active again. Thank you very, very much. Yes, in the atmosphere of confrontation, nobody was willing to or prepared to accept any blueprint from any side. So it became divisive after divisive after divisive situation. It was very difficult for the demonstrators to say that we have the blueprint, because they didn't really think through, except the word decentralization. accept the word that we want reform. We don't want the same kind of system that would, that's what they said, that would usher in the same kind of people into the system who would abuse the positions, who would abuse the power again. So restart, meaning let us go back to the drawing board, let us find a way together. In fact, they wanted to claim that right. That's why there was talk about People's Council or People's Committee. But everybody knew too that that would be impossible, that would not be legitimate. Therefore, the confrontation continued until the martial law was imposed, and then 2 or 3 days later, a coup d'etat, because there was no mechanism to come up with that blueprint that would be required in order to move on. Restart did not mean let us restart on a new blueprint. Let us restart talking about the blueprint. And the demonstrators were putting a maximum demand. You get out first, the country will find its way. And the other side, the government was saying, no, we have the legitimacy. We came from the elections. So that tension, that confrontation had led to the situation on May 22nd. Yeah. I don't know what it means. But again, when you have the power, you feel that you need more and you need longer time in order to solve the problems. I think Western concept of power is human beings seek power after power after power until death. That's Thomas Hobbes. When you get on the back of the tiger, it's dangerous to get down. Therefore, less talk about the deadline, more talk about give us some time to do the reform. My personal view is that you are not going to have a perfect reform in place. First of all, it has to be a participatory process. It has to be a broad-based process talking about the future of the country so that people can feel that they are part of the process. So rather than waiting for a perfect piece of legislation or constitution, it's better to have a broad and generalized document and move into the electoral mode and let the people be part of the process. Similar to what we have done in 1997. It was considered the best constitution ever. But then, it had problem in 2006, coup d'etat, and then new constitution, and now coup d'etat. So to me, there's a danger of this confusion, that if you are an elected government, the longer you stay, that is a measure of success. But when you come in through seizure of power, the longer you stay is a measure of failure. The shortest time you stay is a measure of success. And let the country go on. I hope that will be the case. That's my personal desire. Whether or not that will happen, I don't know. But there is that risk of confusion.
And you have also spoke about the serious polarization in the society. And with the division running so deep in the country, how would social and political reconciliation become possible?
Well, I think, first of all, the people have learned a lot in the past year or past several months that you need to be actively participating in the process, be alert, be vigilant. That is, you cannot allow yourself to be part of of democracy only few minutes on the election day. You have to follow through, you have to be active, you have to be engaged, you have to be participating. That has not been the case in Thailand, at least in the majority of the constituencies, sometimes even in Bangkok. You do participate in the elections and you let everything go, and power tends to be abused. I think people have learned a lot in the past several months that you can't trust the system, you can't trust the people who volunteer to go into the system to work for you. And I think they will become more aware and more moderate in their political affiliation because they know that people whom they trust could abuse their power. So if you open the process and let the people come in, and after the elections, through some kind of electoral process, people come in, I think they will find accommodation with a note of moderation rather than extreme like you have seen in the past several months in the two camps. No side is willing to make any concession to any side, to the other side. It's all or nothing. That's why I was saying the country was falling over the cliff. And the coup came and restrained them back. A point now is to change the direction rather than going to the cliff, going sideways, and then try to find a better pathway forward. I think the people have learned, and I think you have to put your trust in the people, and you have to guard against people or politicians who would come in and abuse the trust and the confidence that the people have placed on them and in them. Open media would help, although that is being restrained. Open civil society will help. Academic freedom will help. I hope that will come sooner than later. That will help us regaining our new balance soon. Yeah, I would use the phrase transformative crisis. I think all the ASEAN countries are going through this transformation period. We believe that by setting up the community, everything shall remain the same inside every country. To protect ourselves from having to change the structure, the power relations inside, the way in which we do things, the way in which we decide things, the way in which people participate in the governance of their own country. That was the assumption. Let us set up a community and we will be protected by this buffer, by this community wall around us. More and more, I believe, every member state of ASEAN will have to go through a period of adjustment. Because without adjusting the structure inside, without adjusting the governance system inside, it is difficult to take advantage of the community. Because the community will require that you have common standards on things, that you have common policies on things, that you are competing with the rest of the world, and you are competing among yourselves. Unless you are prepared to be competitive, it's difficult to maintain yourself. So every ASEAN country is going through this transformative period, transformative crisis, in spite of the fact that they were thinking that the community will help them remain what they have been in the past several years. We don't have to change, we don't have to transform, we don't have to reform. That's not true. So Thailand is going through its own transformative crisis. Many issues that we have to deal with. Many other countries in ASEAN will have to go through the same process of restructuring, of changes, of transformation, law, legal system, governance system, economic restructuring. All these things will have to be achieved in order to benefit fully from the 600 million plus market that is becoming more and more integrated, in order to take advantage of the relationship that we have with our neighbors. Japan and ASEAN celebrated our 40th anniversary of dialogue partnership last year, the oldest dialogue partner. But to benefit from all the resources of Japan in the form of foreign direct investment, in the form of trade, in the form of participation in the larger forum of the region, all the countries of ASEAN will have to make adjustment, fine-tune their own structure. And that, I think, Thailand will not be the exception. Each will be unique in its own way, but each will be going through these transformative changes regardless. Myanmar, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, everyone will have to go through this process. Otherwise, the community is not going to deliver that much.
This way. Thank you.
The problem was the same 2006 and 2014, and that was the abuse, the concentration, and the corruption, and the divisiveness of the polity. I am not, as I said, May 30th, June 5th, the approval rating was very high. I don't think it is that high now. I can't tell you 2015 where it is going to be, but if you take my analysis that the ticket to come in was the promise to reform, to decentralize. And if those were not coming to the satisfaction of the people, then there will be some pressure, some complaint. I'm also eager to know what you will find out in 2015. What I'm feeling now is people are beginning to ask the question, is it, how long? And is there going to be some genuine restructuring and reform in the system, or is it much of the same like in the past? And that is stay as long as you can, resist any pressure to make any adjustment, and that is the problem. When you survey in 2007, the coup was in 2006, you had a rather euphoric, because the country was also very divided. That was the brother. May 22nd is the sister. But the issues were also polarization and, let me put it this way, allegation of massive abuse and corruption. I'm not going to say corruption, but allegation of corruptions. Enough to have 500,000-600,000 people on the streets of Bangkok for seven months. There got to be some substance to their grievances. But then, if you stay beyond your welcome, people will change their mind. We talk about that issue this morning in a smaller group, the research group of the Sasakawa Foundation, Minorities in ASEAN. It's a big issue, and it has a lot of implications into the future. I don't know if you are aware of it. 48% of 600 million people in ASEAN are Muslims. Moderate, accommodating, rather peaceful, but it could become problematic if the community is not moving along the process of growth, of development, of industrialization, of competition. So Southern Thailand is part of that 48% of ASEAN community Muslim. It has always been problematic in the past. It became more critical when, as I described for the rest of Thailand, when people in the provinces felt that they need a space for themselves. They need a breathing space for themselves, breathing room for themselves. They need decentralization or devolution of power from the center. And that was not, if you think the problem in the northeast or north was that problem in the deep south is even more acute of a problem, because these are 2 million people of a very, very unique identity, sharing the same identity, the same language, and the same religion, same culture, same history as people in northern Malaysia or the Malay cultural world. So the reform is going to be extremely critical to them. The devolution of power from the center is going to be very important to them, much like Indonesia did with Aceh. Indonesia did with Aceh was autonomy. Philippines did with Mindanao autonomy. But in Thailand, I think they are asking for decentralization, not autonomy. Decentralization, give them some space, culturally, linguistically, religiously, education. Again, without some shift in the mindset in the center, that reform and devolution would be the theme into the restructuring of the country. The problem of southern Thailand is not going to be resolved easily. Yeah. Yes, just like any diplomatic issues, you talk about talk. You talk about participants in the talk. You talk about the shape of the table of the talks. Going through that process now, who would be representative on the side of the government and who would be the participants on the side of the minority in southern Thailand. And the talks were taking place in Malaysia, not inside Thailand, in Malaysia, with the facilitation of Malaysian officials. Yes, they are talking about that. Things are on hold now. And I think there is an effort to try to find genuine, true representatives rather than the formal older generation representatives. You know what I mean? Since 2004, things have changed a lot in southern Thailand, much like any part of the country. So generation problem, generational gap between the older generation who claim institutional representation and the younger generation who are on the ground, who may have no institutions, but they have their own aspiration. Who would be appropriate to discuss? And what is their agenda? What will be their agenda? And I'm quite sure one of the agenda would be devolution, space decentralization, whether that is acceptable or that is entertained or that is can be part of the agenda. I'm not sure. As I said, mentality-wise, mindset-wise, it is difficult to understand people in power now to think about decentralization. If anything, it's the reverse. It's more concentration, not devolution. Devolution was reform, and decentralization was the agenda of the people on the streets, thinking that one of the reasons for the ill of the country is centralization, over-centralization. But when the military took over power, I don't know if that is something that they can really think about. It's not in the nature. It's not in the mindset. Military everywhere, by the way. Yes. I thought it was China and California. I'm not quite sure if it has been decided. I know that it's under discussion. I know that under the previous government, the discussion was rather intense, that there would be high-speed train, there would be double tracks, there would be wider tracks. I am not sure if the decision has been made. I think China has a lot of financial asset to back up its commitment. That may be one of the attractions, but I'm not sure if it's really a done deal. I think it's still under discussion, under consideration. But connectivity of ASEAN is important. We talk about community, then we realize that how can we become a community when we are not connected? So railroads, shipping lines, maritime connectivity are being discussed very, very intensely within ASEAN, how to make sure that goods and people can move with ease on the landscape of ASEAN. But each country will have to do its own national projects, and then eventually these projects are going to connect ASEAN together. So every country is embarking upon connectivity. Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam are doing the same thing. And one of the projects would be the rail system. Improve upon what exists and expand on what exists and creating new ones. But I think the discussion is still going on. Are you sure? It's definite. It's going to be extremely expensive, even though, with financial consideration or support, but it's going to be very expensive, and have to make sure that there won't be any leakages, there won't be any, corruption, and that has to go through some process of consideration. Yeah. Okay, Ambassador, thank you very much. You were there during the financial crisis in Bangkok. I remember having dinner at your place and trying to talk about what Thailand had to do at that time. That was 1997, 98, 99, yeah? Definitely, you are right. There is social disparity in Thailand. Every speech that I give in Bangkok, the audience in Bangkok, my message was, you urban people must be willing to pay more, either in tax or in the prices of the commodities coming from the countryside. you can't go on living with, in a way, it's a subsidy that, those people are living in poverty, asking for more opportunities for education for their children, for their own economic improvement, for new infrastructure, and at the same time, you are not willing to shoulder or to bear the new or the additional responsibility. So I think now they are talking about inheritance tax. Now they are talking about land tax, because we realize, as you said, we began our development plans back in the late 60s, and we have come to number 11. Every 5 years, one plan, and the gap is getting wider and wider and wider between the rich and the poor. 20% of the Thai people owns 80% of the assets of the country. 80% of the Thai people share among themselves the 20% that is left. Society cannot go on. We have to bring some new structure that would balance the system. But that could not be done under an open system. You know what I mean? Because when you go to the parliament, there will be so much conflict of interest. So any period and any group of people who could do it, if they are committed, it is this period when the power is rather concentrated. Do something that you have to do that is impossible to do in the open system. And my advice to them too, that look, the legitimacy of coming in is in deficit because you came in through the coup d'etat. But the international community can join with you, this group, and you can join with them to achieve certain agenda that is common between us. Human trafficking, drugs, terrorism, corruption, because it's going to benefit everybody, including Japanese investors. So those difficult issues on the common agenda, we have to engage. I was telling people in Washington the same thing, people in Europe the same thing. This is not the time to disengage. Try to achieve certain objectives that you have on the agenda, common agenda, and they can deliver because they don't have conflict of interest, we hope. So difficult issues can be decided upon now rather than when it is opened up again. That is, I hope, what they are trying to do. So land tax, if you have more than 50 rai, which is about 10 or 15 acres, doing nothing, you will be taxed. Inheritance tax, when you pass away, the next generation will have to pay tax, that kind of thing, so that you can redistribute the wealth within the system. It is a major problem in the Thai society, and apparently open politics could not solve it. We are hoping that this limited period will be used in order to make those difficult decisions. I'm not sure, but you are right. That is a fundamental issue that has to be resolved. On the inspiration to others, it has to be issues of legitimate collective concern. You can't expect one democracy to give rise to the next without internal readiness without internal dynamics that would require those things. I only am looking at the ASEAN landscape. As I said earlier, I think ASEAN, everyone is going through a process of adjustment, process of restructuring. Otherwise, we are not going to benefit from the community. To benefit from the global process of openness, competition, and globalization, you have to change your laws inside. You have to restructure your economy. You have to bring in new technology. You have to change the management. You have to get rid of family control business, make it public so that it is transparent, so that it is scrutinized, so that it is open. Internal dynamics of each country will have to be the decisive factor. In Hong Kong, yes, I mean, the students were asking for more space, just like people in Thailand or the students in Thailand 30, 40 years ago. They were asking for more participation, more access to the power too. Whether or not that is going to spill over into the wider Chinese society, I'm not sure. It has to be the internal dynamics of those countries. Yeah.